Thank you for joining us. My name is Ashanti Jones. I am the Director of Community Engagement at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. We are joined with some fabulous New Jerseyans who will be co-exploring with me mass incarceration for people of color in New Jersey and how it has damaged the lives and livelihoods of families and entire communities. We know that there is definitely a need for more investment in public safety initiatives in impacted communities. And so this workshop will really explore with our participants the criminal justice reform initiatives that are currently happening and room for some potential new criminal justice initiatives with members of the community. And so I'll just pass it off to Ms. Marilyn Cooper to introduce yourself and your role.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Marilyn Cooper. I'm currently the co-chair for the Newark chapter of NAACP. Also, as I identify, I am a doctor. I have a doctorate in education, and my doctorate was done on reentry, the struggles. Just give a little point of information. In '96, education was removed out of the prison system. So therefore, a lot of our guys or inmates return to society unprepared. So that's what my dissertation was on. I currently work as a person that does outreach for people with severe to mild mental illness. And that's me. Thanks, Nick. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we can move on to Major Carla Thomas.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Major Carla Thomas, New Jersey State Police, commanding officer over the Office of Employee Relations and Community Outreach. This has been under my purview since the beginning of this year. And pretty much my office, has two bureaus, one that address our internal needs. And under that particular bureau, you'll find our peer services, which is like cop to cop. You'll find medical services unit, which has our doctors and our nurses, our employee assistance unit, which has our licensed clinicians, and then a newly developed diversity and inclusion unit. On the external side, community outreach, we have our community outreach unit, recruiting unit, open public records, and also our public information office. When I came into this office, I realized that there was a need for community outreach to partner with those entities within the state police that goes out there to do law enforcement, to make the arrests. If you're going out there making arrests or getting gangs off the streets or guns off the streets, there should be a community outreach effort. So since I've come into this office, I made it my business that we should be in those communities. So those members, those residents, and the advocates for those communities can get to know us. So if there's any problems that should arise, they have someone that they can call to thwart problems. They could call us too. We could be there to address certain issues, certain matters. But that's my responsibility.
Thank you both for introducing yourselves and also for joining us for this panel discussion. And so we'll hop right in. Our first question is, regarding mass incarceration. We know that mass incarceration is a global issue, right? I would even call it a pandemic, right? In the United States, it's been number one for many, many years in using punitive measures to address criminality. Unfortunately, those measures, impact Black and Brown communities disproportionately. They're overrepresented in the criminal justice system. And the experts, they say that there are many drivers of mass incarceration, right, including poverty, racialized policy, history of systemic racism. In the framework of New Jersey, how would you describe the issue of mass incarceration? What are the drivers that, make mass incarceration exist for us in New Jersey?
Well, at one point, there were mandatory sentences in which offenses such as possession of drugs or the selling of drugs warranted lengthy sentences. There's people out there that have mental illness that, of course, may act out and they'll get arrested. They'll end up being incarcerated. And we question, is that the best way to treat them? I know my agency, we're realizing that there's other ways to handle mental illness other than arresting them. We've partnered with clinicians and we're actively working on a project that's going to be out of Cumberland County in which we're going to ride along a trooper as well as someone who specializes in mental illness to prevent that person from going into the system. Yes, we know it's a problem, but there's different approaches that could be taken to avoid it, to avoid incarceration, to get the people the help that they need.
Yes. Well, I see it. I currently volunteer at an agency. It's a nonprofit, and this is a program that it's called Returning Citizen Support Group in the city of Newark. And what I see that part of the problem is that we're not asking the people that the formerly incarcerated. Also, we need more youth facilities, groups, programs to address some of the issues, because we're not a part of the problem. We're part of the solution, but we're not part of the problem. So we need some input from people so they can give us the insight that's necessary. As I stated, the program that I volunteer at, the Returning Citizen Support Group, the individuals that attend this support group are individuals that have done 20 plus years. And if you have a conviction of 20 plus years, 9 times out of 10, your conviction is based on a homicide. And a lot of these individuals went to prison at a very early age. They went to prison at 17, 18 years old. So they grew up in the prison system, but they know the different deterrents that can be in place to address the youth that we have in the community, especially in the Newark community. But and I'm only centered on Newark because that is my concentration. But it's New Jersey. I'm going to date myself a little bit because when I was younger, there were a lot of different programs that took place that youth were actively involved in. And a lot of those were done, the projects no longer exist, but those community centers in the projects were very vital to keeping people out of trouble. We had a lot of people that did go to prison, but we had so many that did not go to prison. So therefore, I think if we had a more better connection with the formerly incarcerated, we can make some drastic changes.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for answering that question. And so we've identified what we perceive to be the root of the problem, right? We're not looping in impacted people and determining what's, correct for diversion or reentry programs, right? We also have, the policy side where there are, issues of mandatory sentencing that unfortunately disproportionately impact people of color. So when we talk about solutions, right? And like you said, Dr. Cooper, and I think that was actually beautifully said, we are a part of the solution, but we're not part of the problem. So how are the current, or what are the current community engagement program initiatives that are happening to combat that issue of, silencing the voices of the impacted?
Well, there's, I think it's called a street team in the city of Newark that really helps a lot of young males. I think it needs to be better advertised, for lack of a better word, so more people are aware of it. Also, there's a great program in the city of Newark called The Hub on Prince Street. And the Hub has things that you and I may not be interested. Well, let me say I'm not interested in. I'm not interested in recording my own tracks or beats or music. But the youth of today, that's their hook. And I believe we need to engage more, as I said before, more with individuals that understand the current culture. I'm outdated. I can do the research, I can show up, I can volunteer, I can direct, but I think those people or those individuals that are really involved and are on the street are the most impacted people. And they are the ones that can best help us. My nephew just started, and this is one thing that I think is fantastic. My nephew just started a boxing club. I think it's Riverview Court down in the Ironbound section of Newark. And it's where young men, ages, I think from 4 to 21, can come and learn boxing skills. Mm-hmm. And that gives them an outlet so that all that anger, frustration, whatever it might be, they're able to, alleviate some of their pressure. And when I was younger, every project in the city of Newark had a boxing program called the Dukas. And they also brought in females. They were the Dukeettes. I don't know what their role was, but it kept a lot of individuals out of trouble. And I think we need more supportive services.
Okay. Major, I realized that our third panelist has now joined us. Welcome, Giles. Would you mind introducing yourself?
My name is Giles Shipp. I've been in field of law enforcement for over 34 years. I currently now serve as a commissioner with the New Jersey Police Training Commission. Started my law enforcement career actually 6 months in state corrections, and then went over to Edison Police Department in the patrol division, where I served over 17 years in various different capacities. I was asked to come down to the Attorney General's office to work with somebody I was proud to work with, the first African-American Attorney General, and at that time, the Director of Division of Criminal Justice, where I served for quite some time. And in line with the topics that we're talking about, we worked with the New Jersey Institute of Social Justice to develop one of the statewide first reentry initiatives. So happy to be here today. I'm also the current president of Noble, New Jersey, and was a former national president of Noble, which is an acronym for the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. I look forward to this lively and important discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for introducing yourself and your organization. And I'm sure that you'll have vital information to give us and to contribute to this conversation. And therefore, I'm going to ask you to answer this next question first.
Great. Always ready.
Next question basically is centering around the shift that we saw in 2020, right? We've seen a huge shift in how our communities have responded to the death of both Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. Mm-hmm. And from my own perspective, the nation's response felt very reminiscent of what I believe the original civil rights movement would have felt like. It just felt different, right? And I just would like to know, how have you, and this question is for all of you, but I'll just ask y'all to start. How have you, your office or your organization, responded to calls to implement alternatives to policing or non-police first responders? And do you believe that this will help the issue?
Well, let me just start by saying this. This is something that was more televised, but this is not a new phenomenon. We can go all the way back to Emmett Till. All right, and these type of incidents were occurring, especially in the African-American community. One of the things that were most notable on this particular time for me was the fact that there was a global response and it was televised so more people could actually see some of the treatments or misdeeds that are done by officers who should have never been in the law enforcement profession. So quite frankly, getting directly to your question, I think that in New Jersey, we've had a lot of conversations about use of force. We've had a lot of conversation about just basically treating people with dignity and respect at the end of the day. Now we have to take that conversation and turn it into actionable items. So we are looking at a lot of these things. We have had some developments. As I said, it was a tremendous amount of conversations around things such as various different types of use of force, whether it's physical force, whether it's mechanical force, whether it's using dogs or using other types of instruments as on the force continuum. So we're still in that stage. I've always said that one of the best things you can do is to actually hire the right people and make sure that they train properly and train continuously. You know, we're caught up in this thing. Once you complete the academy training, you should be a cop for 25 years in the state of New Jersey. Nothing could be further from the truth. You know, they make us qualify twice a year with our firearms. We should also qualify twice a year with unarmed defensive tactics and other types of things that have, you know, been shown to be essential to the profession. So now, I'm sorry, did I answer all of your question?
I believe you did.
Okay, all right.
And
Thank you.
I'll pass it off to Major.
Yes, Giles, you covered a lot. So I'm going to say ditto. But in addition to what he shared, we have to acknowledge the history of police within certain communities. I think that's the first step. We shouldn't marginalize that. That's real to a lot of people. So even though we may have seen things happen in the 50s, the 60s, and now, you know, quite recently, law enforcement agencies, we have to take ownership of that history. And as Giles said, we have to implement changes in our practices and in our policies. That's very important. In order to build the trust of the community, we have to show that we're building our expertise in the way that we do business, and to make sure that it's fair and just when we do interact with members from the communities. He mentioned building internally. That involves hiring, promoting, and making sure law enforcement agencies represent the communities that we serve. I mentioned to you recruiting is under my purview. I make sure I got my print media right behind me. I make sure that whatever goes out is reflective of how I would like to see the New Jersey State Police. And that involves a high level of diversity. We partner with a lot of various agencies, including Noble, NAACP. We go to colleges in order to gain that diversity on the job. And once they get on the job, we mentor folks so they can elevate. All of that will help towards the goal of when folks are going out and interacting with the community, they're trained well. If they share a similar background, they'll be better equipped to deal with certain cultures. That's important. In addition to that, there should be measures of scrutiny when our folks are out there stopping cars or making arrests. It's all videotaped. So we have measures in place where supervisors are now looking at the interactions between the law enforcement officers and those that have been arrested or they've interacted with it. But it doesn't stop there. Their supervisors have taken a look at it. And there's also independent monitors that scrutinize it even further. So that should exist amongst all law enforcement agencies, not just ours.
Mhm.
Dr. Cooper, do you have any input?
Police involvement is always in the inner city, always a problem because of the perception of how police are perceived. I do believe that training is an initiative that really needs to take place, especially dealing with trauma. As I stated previously, that I work with individuals with mental illness. So on various cases, and even with the current caseload that I have, when they become involved with law enforcement, it's a problem because they don't understand mental illness. And I understand that a lot of agencies now are implementing putting clinicians in the field with the officers, which is definitely a good thing. But I also think that if there can be some additional training for mental illness as well as trauma, it would definitely be beneficial.
You know, if I could, Ms. Jones, if I could just add something to that. I think also what's critically important, again, as I said, who we hire, because I grew up in the underserved community in a public housing project, okay? And I treated everybody throughout my entire career, regardless of whether you lived in Clive Hills or regardless of whether you lived in the project. I treated everybody with dignity and respect. And I also showed empathy for others. So I think that's a trait that people have. It's really difficult to train somebody to care for other people. So when we're selecting people, we tend to look for the physical fitness, which is important, academics, to make sure they can be successful in the academy. That's critically important. We want smart police. But at the same time, I don't think we give enough attention to what I like to call the emotional intelligence, that side of that. I don't think we look for people that have an empathy for others. So, I dealt with everyone from, I've arrested, unfortunately, had to arrest people from everything from homicides right down to shoplifting. I had to care for people who was going through mental health crises, and I treated them all with dignity and respect. And I think that's one of the key important things. You can't make police officers clinicians. You're not going to make them clinical psychiatrists. All right. You're not going to make them obviously psychiatrists. It's a lot of study that goes into that. But at the same time, what you can do is make sure and hold people accountable when they don't treat people with dignity and respect.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Thank you all for, your perspectives on this. And I think everyone made some very excellent points. I'm especially considering what you said, Major Thomas, about not marginalizing, the experience and the perception of police, right? There is a history laid in Black and Brown communities regarding police. And that trauma can be vicarious. It can be something that is just kind of passed down, but it can also be very actual trauma, right? That kind of lives in our communities. Because mass incarceration doesn't begin, in the jails, it begins at arrest, right? Mm-hmm. So how can communities get more involved in what kind of working with public safety officials and in the development of public safety programs to provide feedback on the initiatives, especially when it comes to community engagement and fostering relationships?
Right. Currently, I'm on 5 different coalitions, and they all have a simple formula just to the table, whether it's law enforcement, fire department, the healthcare system, superintendents of the schools. We're all coming to the table to offer a solution to what goes on within certain communities. And I was just on one 2 days ago, and they just had 3 asks. They said, we need programs for the wee kids, the little kids. We need programs for the teenagers. And we also need programs for those that are coming out of jails. So my response to them as a law enforcement agency, we have programs set up in place, the Explorer program, in which we address the teenagers and teach them how we do business as a law enforcement agencies. And we put them through certain trainings. And we also go out to various schools and just share what we do to the youth, but we seldom interact with them. So this year, I've tasked the community and these coalitions, involve us. If you have activities, we'll put on our cleats, we'll come on out. And Salem City, for example, they had their first ever football training camp. Salem City's criminal crime had spiked horrendously over the last year. I think it went up, shootings went up by 500%, murders by 900%. And when we spoke to people there, they said it's because the youth, they have absolutely no extracurricular activities. The community center that was there was closed down, and there's nothing for them to do. So within the last year or so, we've been there almost on a weekly basis, interacting with the youth to make sure they're not idle. We have a large organization, so we could do that. I can deploy troopers or even some of our civilians to go interact with the youth. But it's important that we collaborate with them and not just teaching them what we do as an agency, but listen to them. We just did a recent collaboration with St. Benedict's Preparatory School, in which I sent 18 troopers out into the wilderness with about 30 of their students, and they were tasked on various leaderships building skills. And during that time, the youth, those teenagers, they shared their perspective on law enforcement. And it didn't start off being a positive conversation, but our troopers needed to hear why they ran, why they would run from law enforcement. They needed to hear why they were not trusted. And then by the time the whole program was over, they built such a good rapport that they're now still communicating with each other. So as law enforcement officers, we need to be embedded in the communities we serve, just not write tickets, just not make arrests, and just not do the token community service that we're used to. We have to be there full time.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Cooper?
I'm in total agreement. I mean, that is definitely something that is much needed, so that the stigma of law enforcement is definitely decreased with some of the youth, so that they won't eventually be incarcerated. I commend the state police department for their involvement. I also believe that with Corona, a lot of things changed, and we do need more. And I always just center on the city of Newark because that's that's the city that I'm more comfortable with discussing. In the fact that, more police involvement, more foot patrol. So many activities have been curtailed because of Corona. So hopefully that moving forward, we will have more interaction with law enforcement. And as I stated before, the trauma is real. There's a lot of trauma that has taken place in a lot of youthful offenders or youth period in the community that needs to be revealed. And Mr. Giles, I'm totally on point, and I agree with you that you cannot make police officers clinicians. I hopefully don't want anyone coming for my job after I'm $165,000 in debt, so that someone that's less trained. But the basics, you don't have to be super intelligent. You do not have to be a clinician. You do not have to have a degree to understand what empathy and sympathy is about, and listening skills. 10 years ago, they started two things in society on the whole was effective communication and active listening. When you input those two skills, if you implement those two skills, you'd be surprised at the outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Did you have any input?
Actually, Judge out of Newark, Judge Essex County, Judge Pratt, actually, she used to, she did a great program in line with what Dr. Cooper has just spoke about when she was using procedural justice as a mechanism to address people's problems. And it was very effective. More importantly, it had an impact, so that's one thing. Another thing we need to really get back to from a law enforcement perspective is that, the community are the police and the police are the community. That just can't be after the police decide on what we want to do, how we want to police the community. The community needs to be at the table when we're developing policies. Mm-hmm. The community needs to be at the table when we're talking about strategies for policing, because the community can be one of your best assets. I don't know why certain law enforcement agencies run away from the community. I want to credit Mayor Baraka and now Director O'Brien for what they're going to be doing in Newark, also what they've done in Camden. The evidence shows that when community policing was at an all-time high in this nation during the 90s and early 2000s, crime rates were down. Community police partnerships were up. So why don't we follow the science? All right. And quite frankly, in the state of New Jersey, we had a regional community policing institute that was funded by DOJ. And we had a board of people. I was sitting there representing my chief at the time. We had a board of law enforcement professionals and those who needed assistance in their respective communities with community policing strategy, with engagement strategies. We supported that, and we had great results from that. So why don't we, well, I know administrations change, priorities change, but we need to get back to that. It's needed more now than ever.
Sure.
Absolutely. I definitely do agree with that. The community has always been, I would say they're the experts in what they need, right? And so I think that definitely engaging communities and getting their input on the way.
And let me just say this too, not to be, well, I'm just going to say it, but in certain communities, they are at the table with the law enforcement agencies. It seems like when you deal with underserved communities, they are pushed to the side and law enforcement decides everything that's going to go on in that community. And we got to get away from that because we're not going to move forward as a us versus them mentality.
Right.
It's not going to get us anywhere. We're going to have to work together. The police need the community and the community needs the police.
That's
You
right.
can't put a cop on every corner. It's economically unfeasible.
Mhm.
We need to work with the community and have them as our partner as we address community crime problems.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that. And so when we're talking about changing, saying looping in, or I would say making the police or the public safety models and initiatives more community friendly, we're talking about, you guys were talking earlier about like the different various trainings and things that need to happen. And that whole call to action for, well, the large rhetoric is like defunding police, right? Replacing police with social workers. And even though that might not be the dominant paradigm or the way that, especially those who are very well versed in public safety and what works and what doesn't, there is room, right, for certain concepts like cultural competency, emotional intelligence, which are social work concepts. How would you advocate for raising that level of cultural competence or emotional intelligence within the departments? And I understand that we're talking about training, but like, how do you identify that on the front end, right? When you're talking about hiring the right people, how do you screen for that? Or like, what are the options that are available for public safety people?
Anybody particularly want to start?
No, you
All
guys can
right.
just
Well,
jump in.
let me tell you what we did after the Mike Brown shooting. I went out to St. Louis County. They were the department that showed up with all the military type equipment for the protests. But so we did a review. The Department of Justice asked myself, and there were four other chiefs, one from California, one from North Carolina, one from Harvard, and another one from Boston. We went out there. And one of the things that the chief from Sacramento said that I'll never forget, he said, Giles, he says, when we go to these different conferences, it's all police getting together to talk about what we should do about getting the best recruits on our police department. And he said, it's a circle full of police, and we all are having the same problems. So we get around the table having the same conversation. Verizon doesn't have a problem getting people who are diverse. They don't have a problem getting a diverse staff. They don't have a problem getting competent, qualified people. So why are we? So we really need to, as I said earlier, we really need to look at what are the prerequisites for becoming a police officer, because we tend to, and my hat goes off to Major Thomas because she's got a tough job. You tell somebody to go out and make this happen, but they're not at the table when all the prerequisites are being decided on. So it's like, trying to put a square peg in a round hole, So we gotta go back to the drawing board and see. We know there's enough evidence out there to know what makes a good police officer. So we got to look at that and look at our prerequisites. And lastly, we also have to make that hiring board diverse. You got to have a diverse hiring board. One of the things we did when we were at Edison, we brought somebody in from the Girl Scouts. We brought somebody in from Little League. We brought somebody in from clergy. We brought people in, just regular community folks. And they were all a part of the board process. And trust me, they're pretty wise, and they could tell you if this person was going to be somebody. And you also look at what that person's history has been with respect to community service. That'll tell you a lot about a person also. So, those are just a couple of things that we need to look at, but we really need to look at What's the criteria that we're using to bring folks on?
Thank you. Does anyone else have a response?
Yes, those were great points that Jalshib shared. As I mentioned before, I'm over recruiting, and it is a tough task. When I was given this assignment, the first thing I did was look at my recruiters. Do they represent the folks that we would like to hire, and also the state of New Jersey? So I made sure that I had a diverse group of recruiters. Secondly, as Giles said, the oral boards. We do have oral boards. No, we do not entertain outsiders, Giles, and I know that has been a discussion before, but we do have 3 troopers who sit on the oral boards, in addition to a member from the Attorney General's office. And the makeup of that board, I myself take a look at it to make sure that it's diverse, that there's people of color on that board, that there's females on that board, as best as we can allow that board to be. And if there is a problematic board, there's entities out there that'll let us know about it, to include Noble or the NAACP. If they get complaints that certain candidates are treated a certain type of way, I immediately open up an internal investigation to get the truth out of it, because I do not want any candidates to be treated unfairly. And I also want them to have their say, because under certain circumstances, they probably are hesitant in telling their story. But if an internal matter is present, they're pretty much guided to tell their truth. So, but I'm not always going to be here. Now, how do we get someone else to come in and have a similar mindset? And that's a tough question, because there's few of us here. So what I tend to do is mentor others to come behind me. And those that are junior members, we mentor them and tell them that they have to be the neutralizer within this outfit, and to be fair for folks who are seeking jobs here. So that's my response.
Thank you. Major Thomas, earlier, one of your first points that you made was around mental health, right? Mental health and how we are treating or responding to mental health issues with incarceration, right? Earlier this year, we released a toolkit at the Institute around mental health and how do we invest in youth and not incarceration, right? How do we make a more robust front-end mental health service that will give young people an opportunity to get those needs addressed before they hit incarceration? And that whole community engagement initiative was centered around the fact that there's a disconnect, right, between the mental health providers and who's in the community. There's no critical race theory that's underpinning any of the training programs for people who are responding to these calls, right? And what we did, one of the recommendations was that we put together a community-based helpline, right? That would have all of the responders trained in critical race theory, trained in cultural competence and emotional intelligence to be able to respond and understand exactly the issues that are happening in the communities that they're responding in. That's from a mental health perspective, right? And that's how, we curb incarceration in mental health. But does critical race theory and really just understanding the historical implications and the cultural implications of people's race and that history and that trauma, does that have a place in policing?
Oh, absolutely, it does. Definitely. I said it before. If you're in law enforcement, you have to know the history of various cultures, not just the Black culture, but Hispanic culture, LGBTQ communities, the Asian culture. By having an understanding, you'll be able to deal with issues and situations that arise from those communities. It's very important. Now, I'm not an expert on mental illness, but I'm pretty much a judge. I have a good judgment of what's right and wrong, and being very observant. And what's key with what we're doing is training. We train on mental illness. It's mandatory every year. The key is putting it into practice. I had just received a call maybe about a month ago that a young man was stopped on one of our major roads here. And that was the 10th time He was stopped in 6 days, an African-American driver. And uh, his mom was in a car behind him because they had just went to pick up his car that was impounded. And of course, he was going off on the trooper that stopped him. And the young trooper was about to go and handle him the way that normal law enforcement officers do. But the backup trooper realized, you know what, there's something not right with this. And he walked up, and after questioning, he realized, okay, there's some mental illness involved in here. And he ended up calming the driver down, pulling the young trooper aside and telling him, in this case, you could use your discretion. He just told you got 10 tickets, within the last week. 5 more, that's not going to help the situation. So what we ended up doing was transporting both the mom and the son, making sure they got home okay. And we ended up calling our peer unit in addition to our licensed clinicians in order to give the mom proper resources so she could get her son help. And I also have the chaplains that are under me. We ended up calling a chaplain to get involved to assist the mother. And out of that situation came a young man who got help, and the trooper didn't have to write him out, to punish him for something that he cannot control. So we need more officers that can think like that. The officer who made the stop, he was one of the officers I sent on that wild expedition I explained to you earlier, so he could hear what youth, like I said, from Newark, what their experiences are. So he could learn from that. So the next time he comes across a situation like that, he can think twice between enforcing the law by writing tickets or making arrests or getting help for the person that really truly needs help.
Thank you. And does anyone else have any input?
Definitely mental illness. And I'm just going to reiterate something that I said previously. And you just proved my point. Understanding mental illness does not necessarily mean having a degree or a great length of background in that area. Is understanding the people that you're dealing with. One thing about mental illness, and I advocate for the symptoms to identify. If we just are able to have individuals understanding the various, there's 3 major diagnosis for people with mental illness, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed. That's the bipolar, and that's the schizophrenic. And I just can't think of the third one. But just basic information. So you can see, because that's something, if you just see the norm that's presented, what is being presented to you, then it can send a light bulb and say, oh yeah, this might be. And then you kick in with the critical thinking. We go back to common sense. My mother always said everyone doesn't have common sense. So that's something that is lacking in a lot of different areas. But I think if a lot of law enforcement had the basic understanding of mental illness, and that would give them some insightfulness when they see individuals. I think all law enforcement need to be well aware of what's the crisis unit, that every major hospital has a crisis unit, that if you feel as if you are in over your head and if you identify this as a problem, to not escalate the problem, you can call the crisis unit. Those are the experts. Right. That's some of the things that, some of the tools that we have out here for crisis, for individuals that don't have the knowledge or the willingness, whatever it might be. There is a direction to go in. I'm also an alcohol and drug counselor. And one of the trainings that we do get is the fact that we have to look at various cultures, because when we have to deal with those cultures concerning addiction, it's the same thing with mental illness. There is information out there. And I think it would be conducive if some of that information was given to law enforcement
Mhm.
or supplied to law enforcement. That's it for me.
I definitely agree with that. Thank you so much, Dr. Cooper. And so we have two more questions left before I get out of your hair. But our first question is just our first question is regarding a piece of legislation that got signed into law last month. So we saw that Governor Murphy signed into law the Restorative Justice for Youth and Communities pilot program bill.
Mm-hmm.
That bill allocates $8.4 million to a 2-year pilot program that will be established in Newark, Camden, Trenton, and Patterson. The Restorative Justice Program is intended to serve as a reentry program for young people coming out of the JJC and returning back to their communities, but it's also used to mitigate conflict in the community before it escalates to something that needs incarceration. It centers on peace circles, community conferencing, and it's supposed to, the intent is for it to curb youth incarceration in New Jersey, right? What are some of the results that you're hoping to see from this program in your perspective? And the reason why I ask that is because the restorative justice model loops in everyone, right? It loops in law enforcement officers, attorneys, impacted people, the victim, their family, their support people, their teachers, everyone comes together to not only gather an understanding of, what's happening in that community or what happened with that specific conflict, but it just also gives them insight. So you might have police officers who are not from that community, right? Who may sit in on that to just kind of understand the texture of that community, understand, what values that community has, and also understand how to interact with that community a bit better. And so as a program, we'll begin the RFP process really soon, and organizations will begin reaching out to your respective organizations to participate in the restorative justice process. What are some of the hopes that you have for a program like that?
Well, first, I like to applaud the folks who pushed that legislation and the governor for his signing of it. But one of the things that I've always said was critically important is early intervention. All right. The earlier we can intervene in someone's life when we know they're troubled for whatever reason, all right, the better outcomes we'll have. All right. For example, if we know, unfortunately, and my wife was a principal educator, career educator, and principal in 2 schools in Newark. And some of the problems we're having now is that when they identify a student in school that's having trouble, all right, and that's reported to the parents, all right, some parents take hold of that and address it, and other parents don't. All right. So the earlier, or some people may want to go after or sue the school now for placing their student. And don't get me wrong, I know a lot of that happens, and I know all the stories of how they try to categorize, certain students. But the earlier we can intervene, whether it's in the neighborhood, whether it's in school, the earlier we can intervene in that individual's life and make sure that whatever issues they're having are addressed, the better opportunity we're going to have for success on the back end. I can tell you that firsthand. I know many of people that I grew up with that got into the criminal justice system, and once they got older, we had conversations about it. And they said that if someone had probably intervened earlier, I might have went down a different path, and so we need that. But we also need to do is to make sure when we have them attention. I used to go to JJC and talk to the young men predominantly that were incarcerated when I was a street officer. I didn't go there in a uniform. I went there wearing the same type of clothes that they wore in the neighborhood, and they connected to me, and I went there. I had a lot of money in my pocket, and none of them knew that I was in law enforcement until I told them. After I started talking to them, I was law enforcement. They couldn't believe it, but I still captured their attention, and I gave them different assignments. So when I came back, but I don't want to monopolize all the time. But the fact of the matter is that when we intervene in those young people's lives, the earlier we can get involved, the better outcomes we're going to have on the back end.
And Mr. Giles, you are so on point because part of my dissertation was the 20 individuals that I utilized. I went back to the basics of how they end up being incarcerated and also looking at their educational pursuit. And I would say 15 out of the 20 had been told early on educationally that they really wouldn't amount to anything, and not having that family support to fight to, because they were knowledgeable individuals. It was just the fact that once the seed got planted and they saw that following the criminal realm, if I'm not going to be able to do anything educationally, if I'm never going to be a good person per se, as some of the teachers or people they interacted with had told them, then the criminal aspect seemed more appealing. Therefore, I can buy into somebody like me, or I can be somebody that people will like me because of my reputation. We do have some initiatives that take place. What I hope is that it would reduce a lot of young people going to incarceration. As I stated previously, the Returning Citizen organization support group that I volunteer at, they have a project that they're looking to get funding from the state for, to start talking to individuals before they come out. And these are adults, but speaking to them before they're released into this world, because understanding that people, any period of time that you're away from society, when you return, you see something different. So their program is to address the people, the inmate, why he's incarcerated or she's incarcerated, hold his hand upon release. Because sometimes the deterrent, if someone is there to give you support, helps you from navigating and not getting involved in criminal activity. I think our youth need a lot of hand holding, because there's a lot of temptation. Marijuana is getting ready to be, marijuana is supposedly legal. There's so many deterrents to get them to do the wrong thing. So I'm hoping that some of these issues will be addressed in the pilot program to look at the community on the whole. And I pray for the program.
Yes, I'm going to add that there's a directive that came out of the Attorney General's office maybe about a year or two ago. It was called the Handle with Care Directive, in which law enforcement officers, if they came across a scene or went to a house where a traumatic incident or event had occurred, and a child was there, they were responsible for talking to the child's family, getting the child's name, and in turn, giving that child's information to the school that the child attended, so that child could get further assistance. So we have youth out there that are witnesses to murders, to police forcing their ways into their homes, drug overdoses, suicides. And these are all traumatic events that, if not properly treated or diagnosed, it could lead to having a child in the system, if not properly addressed.
Absolutely. Thank you. I also have very high hopes for the program, and hopefully it does eventually replace our need to rely on punitive measures to address our.
And Ms. Jones, if I could just say lastly, also on that same issue, we also have to make sure that when we get the attention of these young people, that they're getting educational and employable skills. All right. And we live in a different economy nowadays. We need to make sure they know things like coding, make sure they're technology. That's the direction we're going now. It does. I may be somewhat of a novice in this area, so forgive me if I say something wrong, but ain't too many jobs out there with horticulture. Okay. And there's only so many culinary jobs that they're going to have. So, these are some of the programs they put these young people in. No, put them in coding. You can get a coding job. You start at $100,000. They can earn a livable wage. So, that we need to keep that, in the forefront of our mind too, when we're putting these programs together.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that as well. And so as we're winding down, I'd like to give each of you 60 seconds each to just give us some closing remarks, whether or not that's your hope for, community and public safety to have just more kind of immersion and conversations with each other, or just like your hope for, where we're taking public safety and how we can, revitalize those relationships in our communities. And so we'll start with you, Major, and then Dr. Cooper, and then lastly, but not least, Ms. Plunkett.
Yeah, my office's goal is to partner with all of the communities within the state of New Jersey. I don't look at this, Joel said it earlier, I don't look at it as law enforcement versus the community. I'm a part of the community, and there's things that I have to ask my own police department. I want people to slow down on my street. So I can't say it's us against them. I got to listen to exactly what their needs are, and most of those needs are my needs too. So sitting in this seat, my goal is to make sure that the community, they get all of the good out of this agency. And I've also partnered with many agencies we have not partnered with before. Within months, I was in Brian O'Hara's office in Newark. I went down to Salem County, Cumberland County, Atlantic City, and just recently Trenton, and I'm not stopping. If we could join forces, we could do much better. Someone said to me, if you don't have a partnership, you have a problem. So why not utilize all of our resources to assist the communities in just making them safe? Just a simple formula. They just want to be safe, and so do we as law enforcement officers.
Mm-hmm. What do I look for? It's so many things. It's so detail orientated. I don't even know where to begin. I'm definitely believe that it begins with the youth, and we have to offer more for our youth. I was just thinking, I have a client now that, part of this, the information that was sent to us was talking about the family, because we talked about the youth, the youth, we have talked about law enforcement, but I think too is something that needs to be more focused on also is providing support for the family as well. Because if we heal the child and don't heal the family, then it's kind of counterproductive. And it has to be like a wraparound services. And when I was going to get my master's, it was the first time I had heard of Godfrey Canada, the Harlem Children's Zone. And he concentrated in a 4-block area to provide all services and I'm not saying this is something we can do, it's just something that's already out there that might be able to be tweaked for something that we could possibly do. But in a 4-block area, he offered all services to the family as well as the child. That was educationally, employment, housing, food, because there's so many entities involved in this that have to be addressed. There has to be wraparound services. There has to be supportive services so that hopefully, all areas will be addressed. Thank you.
Yeah, well, Dr. Cooper, we can do it. Quite frankly, we have to do it. And money is not an issue. People generally make money an issue when they're really not sincere about doing something. But this is one of the richest nations in the world, so we can do it, quite frankly. The resources are here and we have to do it. When I came up, I had a choice. I could have went either way, and there before the grace of God go I. But because back then, I was the youngest out of 7. I grew up in a public housing project, and my mother was a primary caregiver. All right. But back then we had a better sense of community. All right. And I came up during the turbulent times of the 60s when I was taught about who I am and I was educated about what I came from. So Amistad legislation. We're struggling to get things like that into the school. We in large part suffer from the lack of knowledge of self. We can't even wait for government to do this for us. As a community, we have to wrap our arms around our young people and make sure they're successful. Because if we wait around, it's just going to get worse. It's not going to get better. I just want to say that. And we need to see more community engagement. Like I said earlier, I misstated. I meant Director O'Hare and Mayor Raz Baraka with what they're doing and going to be doing more of in Newark. The community are the police and the police are the community. It's not a matter of when, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Something is going to go wrong in policing because you're dealing with humans. But I can tell you this, if the communities feel like you're a legitimate entity and you've been treating them fairly, guess what? They will be one of your biggest supporters and come on board to support you. Everybody wants to, I don't care what's your ethnicity, your race, or your gender. Everybody wants to live in a safe community. Everybody wants their children to get a good education, and everyone wants their children to be successful. That transcends all races, genders, and economic stratuses. So, we have to get back to that. And just lastly, I just want to say that, things don't happen in a vacuum. All right. If we're not at the table, all right, when these discussions are being had, most likely we're going to be on the menu. All right. So go down there, support your respective legislators, talk to your legislators. First of all, know who your legislators are. Many people don't even know who their elected representatives are, unfortunately. Some people go in the booth and vote right down the line. And if somebody is not representing your interests or what you think you need in your community, vote them out of office because they're doing you a disservice. So get engaged, stay involved, and make a difference because it all starts at home and all politics are local. Thank you.
Thank you, Major Thomas, Dr. Cooper, and Mr. Shipp. I really appreciate, and I'm sure everyone watching will really appreciate your expertise, your genuine concern and passion for making sure that we all, community and public safety officials, work closely together to really mitigate these issues that we're seeing around incarceration, mass incarceration, and police-community relationships. If you guys have any questions, I'm sure that our contact information will be forwarded to you after the session if you want to follow with anyone individually. But overall, thank you so much for participating in this process with us. And we look forward to seeing you at the table.
Yes. Enjoy your day.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.